Today the homily is called Healing or Cure. The first reading for today is from Isaiah 35, verses 4 to 7a. Say to those who are fearful of heart, be strong, do not fear, here is your God. He is coming with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap up like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. I was confused when I first tried to date some of those words. The passages from first Isaiah, who lived in the 8th century, from 740 to 700 before the Common Era. During this lifetime, the 10 northern tribes of Israel were captured by the Assyrians in 721. The remaining 2 tribes and stayed there before the captivity in Babylon in the next century. So I was a bit confused at first when it comes that first Isaiah is actually in the land of Palestine, but biblical scholars have decided that a couple of those lines were out of context and were actually written in captivity in what is now called Deutero-Isaiah. I was particularly intrigued by these opening lines. Say to those who are fearful heart, be strong, do not fear, here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf be unstopped. I was particularly riveted by those lines. The ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. You see, I became completely deaf after elective knee surgery in 2008. The surgeons were puzzled and advised me to wait and see if it would come back naturally. So for over half a year, I was an unwilling visitor to the land of the deaf. We tried everything, including craniosacral work, full-body massages, and my favorite, lying on a table in front of a room full of acupuncture students while their professor stuck me with needles. So when did these ancient people have miracles? Why did they have them, especially, including the deaf one, that did not seem available to me with all of the decades of advances in medical cures? During this 7 months, my moods swung wildly between despair at having to live a very limited life as a deaf person, then hopes that somehow my hearing would miraculously be restored to me. My experiences were deeper than the mere prose of my daily journal, so I turned to writing poetry. Here is one from my darkest night. Lost in the dark. A chance encounter in the dark, 2 other voices mingling with my love's as we walked the dogs one last time before tucking them into bed. The dogs must be barking as their tails are wagging and leashes tangle, but looming trees block what little light there is in this trysting hour. Suddenly sidelined, I sit isolated, off the beaten path, defeated by both the darkness and my deafness. Flotsam flung here so soon from the hearing world. A month ago, my undisputed own, while life swirls around me, oblivious to my stifled cries. The next reading echoes the same theme of healing, this from the hands of Jesus. Mark 7, verses 31 to 37. I have a new companion. He turned from the region of Dyer and went by the way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought him to a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Cheryl's laughing at that. That was actually a common way of healing and also a way to seal bargains and agreements. So back to this. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, That is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He's done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." Centuries later, another man who was deaf had been cured. How his own life had changed with so many opportunities. Mine, however, had been derailed because of my own deafness, and it had never been cured. Even today, while I have a cochlear implant, in no way does it mimic natural hearing. So every day I need to deal with challenges to deal with the hearing world. In between bouts of self-pity, I came to realize that virtually everyone has had something similar happen to them, something that rocked the foundation of their world. Might be a job loss, a divorce, a natural disaster, an accident, or some sort of sickness that took away their security and even more deeply, their sense of self. I have friends who have been dealing with this. Several months ago, their oldest child, Wilson, age 7, was diagnosed with cancer of the leg. It was inoperable, so they tried radiation and chemotherapy to shrink it. This went on for months and months. It impacted the whole family, including a younger son and their daughter, who was still a toddler. It involved frequent traveling to another for consultations and treatment, missing work, finding someone to care for their younger children. Finally, they made an incredibly difficult decision, as all other options failed to stop the cancer. It involved rotationplasty, a word that was new to me, whereby when the leg is healed, it can function as a knee by turning it around in the opposite direction and then have a prosthetic attached. I can't even imagine having to make such a decision, much less trying to explain it to a 7-year-old. And yet they did not make this journey alone. The whole community pitched in. The grandparents made themselves available for support and child sitting, as others contributed what they could. Yet even with all the support, Wilson was sidelined in so many ways. First, he's still at home rather than going to school as a second grader. The wound is still healing. His teachers, however, work with him every day through online education to keep him current with his class. He'd been eagerly hoping to escort his younger brother to kindergarten when school opened. The brothers were very close. The playground was a place that the young family took their children to very frequently, but Wilson's condition made it impossible for him to join his brother and sister in their play, until the whole community pitched in and built a fully accessible playground. Here are some pictures. Now to weave these stories together and finally address the question posed by the title of this homily, Healing or Cure. I wanted just to have my hearing restored as Jesus did for the deaf man. I did not want to live the rest of my life as a person who is deaf, who would be challenged daily by the limitations of my hearing instrument and at times my patience as well. I am certain that Wilson's parents and Wilson himself wished and prayed desperately for a cure, so that eventually his life would return to normal. But that did not happen for either of us. As I was struggling with my accepting my deafness, there would be no cure for me. I remembered something I learned from my moral theology class at Mount Angel Seminary in Benedict, Oregon, decades ago, where I was working on my master's in theology and scripture. There is a difference between a cure and healing. With a cure, everything eventually returns to how it was. Healing means accepting what has happened, wrestling with it if we must, like Jacob wrestling with the angel, then wresting blessings from it. For me, after I found out I would not be cured, Cheryl, a former electrical engineer, and I decided that our ministry would not be as co-pastors in a church, but champions and advocates for others with hearing loss. We began hearing XX solutions in 2011 and have done talks and presentations across the states, written legislation, and installed hearing loops in literally hundreds of facilities, including churches, retirement homes, tourism centers, schools and colleges, auditoriums, theaters, performing arts centers. The list goes on. Because of my deafness and Cheryl's electrical engineering training, we have literally helped hundreds of people across 8 states to hear more clearly. With Wilson and his family, his story is yet to be written. Yet I know them and I remember him as a toddler exploring the pews of our church as the service went on. His journey will be much different now. He will soar to new heights. The way he and his family have joined together in adversity will inspire many. In retrospect, seeing how my own life changed after I embraced my deafness, I would not have it any other way. Before I sign off, I would like to put in a word for the fully accessible playgrounds. The Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 continually actually mandates that any playground constructed after the signing of this act must be fully disability accessible. You can find a full description of what that means in the link below. We will keep it online for a few moments so that you can copy the link. Someone you may not even know or may never even meet might be depending on you to be your advocate.